welcome to another video from Byte Analytics. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you've created a visual in Power BI, you've placed the measure on the visual, you've added a category from one of your dimensions into the visual, only to find that you've got a huge scroll in the visual like you're seeing here. Now, this kind of visual really doesn't add any value for any of your report consumers. If anything, it just creates a lot of noise, and it's difficult for people to understand what really the meaningful values are and what is that noise. So there are a couple of techniques people use to remove that noise or filter out anything which is really irrelevant. Now, that's a decision which the report author makes with the business or the users of the report, but the common technique people use is to limit the visual down to maybe top 5 or top 10 or top n number of entries as far as the category goes. So let's go over and let me show you how that's currently achieved. Here is my visual, and I've got a huge scroll going all the way down to values which may really be insignificant given the magnitude of the other numbers. So the normal way we would deal with that is open up the filter pane, and what I want to do is actually filter out the product name because that is my category. So what I want to do, I want to filter out the product name based on the top n number of rows. And how do we do that? If I expand the filter pane and the filter type, I have an option in here to pick the top n number of rows. So I want to pick the top 5 rows, and then I have the option to specify which field do I want to use to evaluate the top 5 rows. Now in my case, what we're using here is the sales amount measure. So what I can do is search up sales amount and drag that over here into the filter well and hit apply filter. And all of a sudden you will see that my visual is now filtering down to the top 5 bikes or top 5 products based on the sales amount in descending order. Now that's great. That's one way of dealing with it. The only problem here is that this is actually quite a fixed technique, and it might not work for every report consumer. Some people might like to see 5 options, others might want to see 10 maybe, and that works as well. Unless you train your users to come into the filter well, they're not really going to be too keen on coming in here to do that. So we need to find a way which is actually dynamic for them to do that. And the other way of doing that is giving the user the option to pick a dynamic number from a filter on the canvas. So we're going to dive into that. So let's take a look how we can achieve that. Okay, so let's firstly clear off the filter we have here, and our visual is back to normal. So the first step I'm going to do actually is create my custom filter or my custom options that I'm going to use to filter the table. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select maybe 5 and 10, 15 and 20. Remember, these are just custom options, and I'm going to call this table top n selector. And I'm also going to call the column name, let's rename that top n. So let's just come in here and delete that and hit load. And what that's done is created a table for me, and within the table I have the option to pick a custom value. Now the default summarization on that is sum, but we don't want that. We're going to change that to don't summarize. And now let's drag out this column onto the canvas, and let's change that over to the filter. And we want to update the filter. Let's change its type to a vertical list. Right, so now we have the ability to pick either 5, 10, 15 or 20, and that could be anything based on what you've specified in the table we saw earlier. It's entirely down to your design, but it will give you the flexibility to not have to go into the filter well. So let's continue with this. So the next thing we need to do is have a measure which is going to be used to evaluate the top n number of rows. In our case, we already have that. I have a measure defined here, which is sales amount, and sales amount is nothing but the sum of the sales amount column from the fact internet sales table. The next thing we need to do is actually create a DAX measure which is going to recognize our selected value within the filter. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come here and click on new measure. And I'm going to call this selected top N. And I'm going to use the function selected value. And as soon as the column opens, I'm going to specify the table. And in our case, it is the top N, and I'm going to give it the full path to the column as well, and hit enter. So now we have our measure called selected top N. Let's just drag that measure onto the canvas as well and see how that's behaving. So let me come here and search for that. It's currently a card, and you can see straight away it is picking up our selection from our filter. So now if I go to 15, you can see the measure value is changing dynamically based on what I'm selecting. That's great because it now recognizes what I've selected as the user. The next thing I need to do is create a measure which is going to perform the ranking of the sales amount against the product names. So let's create this new measure here. Let's go over to the top and click on new measure. And let's call this product rank. Let's move down. And I'm going to type in rank X. Now, thing to note here, we're using the X function. The rank X contains the X. That means it's an iterator function, so it will loop over all the entries of the table I'm about to specify. And for each row of that table, it will evaluate something, and it's going to give it the position out of all of the rows. So what is the table we need to loop over? Well, in our case, it's going to be all selected. We're going to embed another function in here, all selected, because we want to keep in mind the selections which are made by the user. All selected, and then the product name. So that's the English product name here, which you can see in the axes on this visual. Let's give it a comma. Now the next thing it wants is the expression, and it's asking us basically what expression am I going to evaluate the product name by. So in our case we already have that. As I showed you earlier, we have the sales amount measure which is already created, and that's nothing but a sum of the column. The next parameter it's asking is what is a specific value you want to rank. Now in most cases for the rank X, this parameter can be left blank. It's only in specific cases where you need to pick out a specific value and maybe you're applying a filter to the sales amount. But in our case, we're not applying any filters. We simply want to rank the sales amount against the product name. So let's place that as a default. We're not going to specify anything there. And let's move down. And the next parameter is the order in which the ranking should occur. We're going to specify descending, although the default itself for the rank X is descending, but we're going to specify that anyway. And let's close off our function. The next thing we need to do is create another measure, and this measure is going to recognize our value which is selected here in the filter pane, and then marry that up to the product rank which is being evaluated in this measure here. And by doing so, that is what is going to give us our end result in our visual. So let's go over and click a new measure. And let's call this top N sales. And let's open this up with an if statement. So we're going to say if the product rank is less or equal to the selected top N, then we want to return the sales amount. And that's all we need to do. So let's just understand what's happening here. We have the product rank, which is being evaluated using the rank X function. The function will loop through all of the product names specified here based on the sales amount and return a rank, which is a position or a number, such as 1, 2, 3, 4. In this measure here, all we're saying is if the product rank is less or equal to the selected value which we're seeing here, then in that instance, we want to return the actual value in our sales amount measure. And the result of that will be evident shortly. Let's put this to the test now, and let's see how this works. Let's clear this off. And now, back to our measure here, let's take out the base measure, which was sales amount, and let's add in the top end sales measure, which we can see here. And now what we should find is, based on what we select here, the visual should update. So there we go. And as you can see, as I've clicked on 5, we are now seeing the top 5 entries in our visual here. If I click on 10, that is giving us 10 entries, 15 and 20 and so on. So that's how we can use a dynamic form of top N using a few DAX measures and a custom table to make our visuals not only truly dynamic, but actually meaningful to our users to consume. Remember, a lot of noise is not really going to help your users understand your data. We want to give them the flexibility to actually pick and choose the data they want to see, and creating a dynamic top N measure is really a powerful way to achieve that. Now let's just go one step further and really finish this off. As you can see at the moment, the visual has a static title, and we can really make that element dynamic as well by introducing a dynamic title. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go over here and click on New Measure. And I'm going to call this dynamic title equals. And let's start by typing in top space, and then I'm going to select my selected top N measure, which actually holds the value which has been selected. And then I want to concatenate that again with some further text, which is going to be products by sales. And there we go. That should give me my dynamic title. So now what I need to do is make use of that title in my visual. So let's go over to the visual and let's choose title. And currently we have a static title. So let's go on FX to make that dynamic. And we're going to click on field value because that's what we need. And let's drop the value down here. Let's start typing in dynamic and let's drop the list down. And here we are, we can see our newly created measure. And if I click on dynamic title, click OK, now you can see our title has also adjusted dynamically. So once again, if I cycle through my options, I can see the title is representing the number of items which are being filtered. So that's how we can match our titles dynamically to what the visual is actually trying to show us.